The wind dragged over the plains, stirring the dry grass and the smell of rain. Jeb Carter stood alone near the corral, the leather reins of his horse wrapped loosely in his hand. The sky was painted in bruised shades of purple and orange, and the last of the sun sank behind the ridge where the McAllister ranch ended and the wild began. His chest felt heavy, the kind of weight that didn't come from labor but from loss. He'd spent 10 long years working this land, giving it his sweat, his bones, and his youth. Now it was over. The letter in his pocket made it final. The foreman had come down not an hour ago, carrying that paper like it was nothing but another piece of business. The boss says you're done, Carter. Pack your things and clear out before sundown. No reason, no chance to speak. Just a cold goodbye delivered by a man who wouldn't even meet his eyes. Jeb had always known he wasn't the kind of man who made noise. He wasn't born to money or talk. He worked, he kept his word. He fixed what was broken and didn't ask for much. But somehow even that hadn't been enough. Maybe it was the missed shipment last week. Maybe it was just that he didn't fit anymore among men who wore clean boots and called themselves cattlemen, while others did their work. Whatever it was, the place he'd called home didn't want him now. He brushed a hand across the horse's mane, the familiar feel grounding him. The animal, a dark chestnut gelding named Boone, flicked its ears and snorted, sensing the shift in its rider's mood. Jeb let out a long breath, the kind that carried more than air, then swung up into the saddle. He didn't look back at the bunkhouse, didn't look toward the main house with its white porch lights glowing soft against the dark. There was no use holding on to something that had already turned its back. He steered Boone toward the open ridge. The air was turning cold fast, the kind of cold that crawled under a man's coat and stayed there. The smell of rain sharpened and the wind picked up grit from the trail. He tightened his hat against it and rode on. The land spread wide before him, endless and empty, and he tried not to think about how he had nowhere in particular to go. Lightning cracked far off in the distance, thin and quick, lighting up the rim of the mountains. A storm was coming fast, too fast. Jeb muttered a curse under his breath and nudged Boone into a quicker pace. He'd ridden through worse, but the ground here was slick when wet, and a wrong step could take a horse down easy. The first drops of rain hit, sharp as needles. The smell of sagebrush mixed with wet dust filled the air. That was when he heard it. A sound carried faintly on the wind, soft at first, easy to miss if a man wasn't listening. Boone's ears pricked up and Jeb slowed him, turning his head toward the sound. It came again, clearer now, a cry, not the cry of an animal but a voice, high, strained, and filled with something that didn't belong out here in the storm. Fear. Jeb felt his chest tighten. He turned Boone toward the sound without a second thought, spurring him down the slope toward the lower canyon. Rain whipped against his face as the trail turned rough, the horse slipping once before finding its footing. The voice came again, louder now, closer. Then he saw it. Down in the ravine below, a small wagon lay tipped on its side, one wheel shattered, its canvas torn open. A horse lay still nearby, its reins tangled in a splintered post. And next to it, a figure struggled in the mud, a young woman pinned beneath a heavy wooden beam that had fallen from the wagon frame. Jeb slid out of the saddle before Boone even stopped moving. His boots sank deep into the wet earth as he ran to her. She was half covered in mud, her dress torn at the sleeve, her hands raw from trying to free herself. Her breath came in gasps, shallow and panicked. When she saw him, her eyes widened, blue, frightened and desperate. He dropped to one knee beside her, his hands finding the edge of the beam. It was thick, part of the wagon's support frame, and soaked heavy with rain. He braced his shoulder against it and pushed, muscles straining, but it didn't move. He tried again, teeth gritted, digging his boots deeper for leverage. The beam shifted a fraction, enough for her to pull one leg slightly free, but not enough to escape. He leaned close, his voice low and steady despite the storm. "Hold on." He pushed again, harder this time, drawing on every ounce of strength left in him. The wood groaned, the mud sucked at his boots, and finally, with a ragged sound, the beam rolled just enough for him to drag her out. She cried out once, then went limp in his arms. Her skin was cold. He brushed the wet hair from her face, his heart pounding as lightning flashed again, and in that moment he knew her. Emily McAllister, the boss's daughter. He looked around, realizing what must have happened. The storm had hit fast, the trail too slick for her wagon. She'd probably tried to cut across the ravine to beat the rain and the wheel had gone out. A foolish risk for anyone to take alone, but she'd never been the kind to stay behind. He remembered seeing her once or twice from a distance, riding with her father's men, proud, curious, never still for long. Now she was pale and trembling, barely conscious. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it close. She stirred, whispering something he couldn't make out. He lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. Boone was waiting a few yards away, restless but steady. Jeb swung her up into the saddle first, then climbed up behind her, keeping one arm around her to steady her. The rain came harder now, pounding like drums on the earth. The trail was nearly gone beneath a layer of mud, but he knew this land like the back of his hand. He guided Boone through the low ground, avoiding the rocks that could break a leg. Every so often she stirred, murmuring his name, though she couldn't have known he was there. He didn't answer. Words didn't matter now. Only getting her home did. By the time the ranch lights appeared in the distance, the night had swallowed everything else. Boone was slick with sweat and rain, his sides heaving, but he kept moving. Jeb held Emily close, feeling her heartbeat weak against his arm. As they rode into the yard, shouts rose from the porch. Men came running, lanterns flaring against the storm. The doctor's wagon stood ready by the steps. McAllister himself came out last, his coat thrown on hastily, his face drawn with worry. When he saw Jeb carrying his daughter, his eyes went wide and the color drained from his face. He ran forward, shouting for help, his voice breaking. Jeb lifted Emily down, passing her into her father's arms. She stirred again, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet his before closing. McAllister clutched her close, looking down at her with a sound that was half a sob, half a prayer. The men crowded around, the doctor pushing through, but Jeb stepped back into the rain. He felt the ache in his shoulders, the sting in his hands where the beam had cut into them. He didn't feel the cold anymore. He just watched. When McAllister finally looked up, his eyes met Jeb's. There was shock there and something else. Shame. His voice came out rough, barely steady as he spoke. "Carter, you saved my girl's life." Jeb nodded once, tipping his hat slightly. "Just happened to be riding by, sir." McAllister took a step forward, rain running down his face. "Wait, Carter. You can't go. I made a mistake. You're not fired. I'll make this right." Jeb turned slightly, his back to the light. The storm softened behind him, the thunder rolling farther away. "No, sir, you were right to let me go. Maybe this was just my last bit of work here." McAllister started to speak again, but Jeb was already walking toward Boone. He mounted slow, his movements tired but sure. He looked once more toward the house where Emily's silhouette showed faintly in the window light. Then he touched his hat again, a quiet farewell, and turned the horse toward the open dark. The storm had broken now. The air smelled of wet sage and cold earth. Behind him, the ranch lights faded into the mist. Ahead, the plains stretched wide and free under a sky clearing to stars. Jeb didn't know where the trail would take him, but for the first time in a long while it didn't matter. He'd lost a job, maybe even a home, but somewhere in the night behind him, a girl was breathing because he'd been there to hear her cry. That was enough. He rode on, the rhythm of Boone's hooves soft against the damp ground, the wind easing to a whisper. The land opened before him, endless and honest, and for the first time all day, Jeb Carter felt at peace.